I know it's a bold claim to make, but hear me out. I've been thinking a lot about how sister location might be incredibly relevant very soon in Five Nights at Freddy's, as in the next game. And recently, I got 2 questions to the podcast that might show us exactly what we're going to see in that next game. And if they're right, it could shake up everything we thought we knew about sister location and what William Afton's goals for that facility were. Slices, put on your aprons and let's bake ourselves a theory. Now, I already hear some of you. For where we are in the story, why would we be going back to sister location? Well, it actually has a lot to do with what we see at the end of Security Breach Ruin. And frankly, I've talked about this plenty on the channel, so I'll be very brief, but we should, for the sake of today's video, go over it. At the end of Ruin, we see Cassie running away from the FNAF 6 location through a series of caves and ending up in a room with a scooper. Now, not every room that has a scooper is going to be the sister location scooper. And frankly, this machine looks a lot different than this machine, which I went over in this video, and you can see right here, there's actually a good reason for it. But it seems likely that whatever this facility is, it was at one point the sister location bunker, and we get that from the layout we learn within Secret of the Mimic. In that game, we learn that this entire facility was built by Edwin Murray an incredibly long time ago, all a part of Murray's costume manor, and the secret experiments he was doing with the Mimic at the time. But he built the entire fake pizzeria we see in FNAF 6. He built the tunnel system that connects it to sister location, because he built underground laboratories underneath what would eventually become the FNAF 4 house. This plot of land that MCM is on eventually becomes the plot of land the Pizzaplex is on. And if we look at a house on a hill, well, what does that look like besides the FNAF 4 house? And since we know sister location is underground somewhere near the FNAF 4 house, the fact that there are a series of underground laboratories right next to the house that becomes the FNAF 4 house, it all is so direct. It's basically confirmed that this layout was reused by William. I know this is a lot to just throw out so rapidly, but all I'm trying to say is that there is a lot of precedent that FNAF 6 and sister location are connected, or are at least nearby facilities underground that were at one point connected via tunnel. So if we see Cassie running away from the FNAF 6 location underground and not coming above ground, but ending up in a facility with a scooper, it is pretty fair to assume that she ended up in some version of sister location. But that's old news. I've been saying that. Plenty of people have been saying that. Why might this next game that could take place at this location change everything we know about Five Nights at Freddy's? Well, with a fairly subtle and sneaky, but incredibly likely retcon. One that, in the grand scheme of things, doesn't mean we were wrong about anything, doesn't materially change anything, but recontextualizes what we thought we knew, and includes the new lore we've just received. Alright, I've teased it enough. What the hell am I talking about? I'm talking about the fact that only 40% of you guys are actually subscribed. So it is completely free to do, and it really helps out the channel if you could just drop a sub. I do this every week. I got editors to pay. Please, if you can, like, comment, and subscribe. It does wonders more than you know. Okay, though, for real, get to the point. Recently, on the Freddy Fazbear Pizza podcast, the weekly podcast I have on this very channel, I answered 2 questions that, when combined, could not only be fully accurate to the next FNAF game, but like I've been saying, if they're true, it changes everything. So what are these questions? The first one is from Unusual Carrot, and he reads, Proto Freddy's, the prototype Freddy Fazbear's Pizza we see in Secret of the Mimic, is the sister location observation room. I'm not going to go over all of my evidence for this, would be one long email, but here are some bullet points to get you started. Identical layout and theorized to be in the same location. Help Wanted 2's Princess Quest being a literal direct foreshadowing. William's discovery of F10N4 kickstarting a base of operations. Everything already pointing to sister location 2 being the next game. All being said, I believe it makes perfect narrative sense, having shown us the humble beginnings in Secret of the Mimic to what became of the horrors of sister location. In other words, this theory is supposing that the room we play in the ending of Secret of the Mimic, that prototype Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, is the same room we can see on the cameras in the Entered Night and Custom Night of sister location, to the point that the private office itself is the security office F10N4 is inside of. And truth be told, at first, I was not too sure of this theory. Because on one hand, there is a lot of merit to it. As is mentioned, the layout is frighteningly similar. This is the camera layout of Sister Location, and this is a top-down view of the prototype Freddy's Pizzeria in Secret of the Mimic. They both have the private office, a hallway on either side, a side room for each hallway, connected to a larger room at the top, and a vertical vent in the middle. Granted, this is not exact, I want to be clear on that. The vent isn't exactly the same, and the prototype Freddy's Pizzeria is a lot larger than the room we see in Sister Location. Now, these are minor issues, and there are ways to work around it that we'll go into, but I just want you to not think that I'm blind. I see the differences. As he wrote, Princess Quest 4 is another great piece of evidence. I mean, the fact is, it's a minigame that starts in the FNAF 6 location, goes underground in the game, and then to exit it, you have to take the Sister Location elevator up. Inexplicably, you're in this minigame in this digital world, and then suddenly, the Sister Location elevator. That's weird, and they never explain it. But maybe this is the explanation. Now, I've already mentioned in this very video that it seems incredibly likely the next thing we're going to do in the FNAF timeline is go and rescue Cassie, who was last seen around these ruins, which are likely to be Sister Location. Add that onto the fact that I discussed here that Scott gave us a teaser for what they're working on. A sequel, specifically not a 3, a 2. So not Help Wanted 3, and realistically looking at the franchise, it only makes sense to be either Sister Location 2, Security Breach 2, or FNAF World 2. And as much as you should always bet on FNAF World 2, right now I think Sister Location 2 makes by far the most sense. There's all this potential lore in this area that Cassie was last seen in. Not to mention, like Unusual Carrot said in his email, there's way more evidence than just these 4 bullet points. Take, for example, the minigame selection of Help Wanted 2. It's unclear exactly what the minigames are. Like, in Help Wanted, we are very clear from the start this is all a VR game, but Help Wanted 2 seems to be taking place in the real world, so in that case, what are the minigames we're accessing on this computer? Are they security camera footage? Are they memories of the player? We're not sure about that. Regardless, it's interesting to note that an entire section of it is inexplicably dedicated to Sister Location. There are FNAF 6 minigames sprinkled in, it's the nurse minigames. There are Fall Fest minigames sprinkled in, which is strange, but sure. And the majority of the minigames are things that could have happened at the Pizzaplex to begin with. That all makes somewhat sense. Then why is it that the, going by the layout, last section of the game is entirely dedicated to Sister Location? To the extreme that if you're going for a normal playthrough where you collect all the presents, the last minigame you would play if you're going in order from left to right, top to bottom, like normal humans do, the last minigame is a boss fight against Circus Baby, arguably the main character of Sister Location, and arguably the main antagonist of Help Wanted 2. I mean, hell, the game starts with a shadow silhouette jump scare of Circus Baby. Why is she so present here? But if this is the room connected to the private office of Sister Location, suddenly that influence makes a lot more sense. Now, admittedly, at first, one of my big hesitations with this theory was this room double dipping. The idea that this room is almost guaranteed to be the FNAF 6 fake pizzeria. I mean, when we see it in Sister Location, it's on lock. Everything inside of there is stuff you could have purchased during the Freddy Fazbear Pizzaria Simulator. And then in Ruin, we go in the rooms around this room, and there's burner rooms, rooms with these big fiery burners at the bottom, which would have been perfect for Henry Emily's plan. Something to lure everybody in and burn them up. So if this room is meant to be the FNAF 6 pizzeria, which is all but guaranteed, then it can't also be the private office for Sister Location, right? That was my main hesitation when I first read this question, but as I think about it more and more, who's to say it can't? Sure, if we're just going off the layout map of Sister Location, this room is too small, admittedly. But there are ways around that. This map is anywhere from 5 years to decades later, so maybe the room was renovated, maybe not all the room was fully needed, maybe the map's not accurate, maybe it's a small retcon. We can't not consider the possibility that it makes more sense story-wise for this to be the same room, and if the only issue is that on the cameras the map size isn't correct, That's a pretty small retcon in the grand scheme of things. And then if we go off of visuals, it fits perfectly fine. I didn't realize this because I didn't play that much Custom Night from Sister Location, to be honest, but the rooms we see through the cameras of Custom Night are already kind of pizzeria themed. The floor has checker tile on it. The walls have that classic Freddy strip along the side of it. So it already kind of looks like a pizzeria. Why can't it be the same pizzeria? Now I do hear another counterpoint. If the FNAF 6 pizzeria is the Sister Location private office area, why would Molten Freddy and Scrap Baby come back? Wasn't the entire point of Sister Location that the Fun Times are so sick and tired of being stuck down here, they would do anything to get out? Why would the next place they go to be right back down to the bunker? Well, they both have proper motivation, because they both think William Afton's down there. Circus Baby, or at that point in the timeline, Scrap Baby, is dead set on helping her father, William Afton, accomplish his plans. She thinks his goal is to put everyone back together and bring them all back to life, and she'll do anything to accomplish it. We hear her say this directly at the ending of FNAF 6. Everyone remembers the peak monologue that Henry gives at the end of Freddy Fazbear Pizzaria Simulator, but a lot of us sometimes forget that monologue starts with connection terminated for a reason. First, Elizabeth is yapping. It begins with Scrap Baby going on about how we fell right into a trap. This was all for William. William's gonna put us all back together. This was all his doing. And then she's told how misinformed she had been. But she came here willingly. She thought that William Afton was here, and part of the grand design was to get to William Afton so he can fix everybody. So then that's why she would go down there. She thinks William's down there. It's all part of the plan. She might not have even wanted to leave the bunker in the first place. She might just have wanted to seek out William Afton. Molten Freddy, on the other hand, is a bit different, but to be fair, Molten Freddy, at least from the death lines we get in FNAF 6, seems to be fairly aware of the familial relations here. You know, we got the a big happy family, a bunch of mentions like that, I hope I'm not late to the party, and similarly, if Molten Freddy is the thing that becomes the blob, which seems most likely, then we know that Molten Freddy wants desperately to kill William Afton. Which, you know, we could have probably assumed anyway. It is kind of the Funtime animatronics that he tortured, filled with souls of kids he killed. This thing does not like William Afton. And if Molten Freddy thinks William Afton is down here, I would not doubt if that's the reason it so willingly comes. After all, Molten Freddy seems to be fairly agile in this weird, wiry form. It might be able to sneak back out once it kills William Afton now, or at least think that it can. So even if FNAF 6 and the Sister Location observation room are the same room, then these characters still have a reason to go down there. And this whole facility was put together by William Afton to accomplish his goals, originally, and then was reused by Henry to accomplish his goals. But we know what Henry's goals are, to put an end to all of this. The question is, if this truly was a massive pizzeria that we now know that it is, what were William Afton's goals? Why would he do all of this? Well, that goes into one of the pieces of evidence from this email, and majorly into the evidence of the other email I've yet to bring up. What was that other email I received? Truth be told, this email is actually about a different question, but it's the context this person gives about their question that I want to discuss today. The question was sent in by Ginger on the Patreon, and it reads, so I've had this theory rattling around in my head for a while, that an upcoming game might reveal / retcon that Ennard was the Mimic all along. We know that the first 6 in-universe games were based on some amount of truth, but could have been influenced by misinformation or creative misinterpretation. And I can see how the Mimic could have been creatively interpreted to be an amalgamation of robot parts and spirits rather than a complex AI endoskeleton. And to me, this is very interesting. Now, straight away, frankly, I don't fully agree that Ennard could just be the Mimic. These seem like too much of a separate character. We see the Mimic in Secret of the Mimic, and we see it in Ruin, and it looks generally the same the whole time. The idea that it looked like Ennard at any point doesn't super track. Not to mention the flowchart of Ennard to Molten Freddy to the Blob makes too much sense for it to be the Mimic, and then Molten Freddy came out of nowhere and then turned into the Blob out of nowhere. You know what I mean? Like, that doesn't add up. But what is worthwhile to bring up, and what does get me thinking from this question, is to think about what the Funtime animatronics truly are. They're incredibly advanced animatronics, capable of mimicking speech, with exoskeletons that can morph around a bit, and endoskeletons that are able to move throughout the exoskeleton, move outside of the exoskeleton, form together and change their shape enough to fit inside of Michael Afton. Do you see where I'm going with this? I don't think that Ennard is the Mimic, but it seems like the fun times were made in the Mimic's image. So what does this mean? And what would we learn in this new FNAF game that changes everything? Well, let's put our evidence into the oven and see what kind of horrors rise. Once all that Mimic nonsense was settled and the secret was out, William went to collect his spoils to see exactly what he had purchased, surveying the land and the facilities inside of it, and he found more than he dreamed he ever could, namely F10N4, a supercomputer which seemingly housed a perfect recreation of the mind and personality of Edwin Murray's late wife, Fiona. Quick aside, I know and you know that F10N4 is not a perfect replica of Fiona. F10N4 is way more robotic and servient to Edwin, but let's be real, it was the 70s, William probably didn't know the difference. Okay, that's all, I just wanted to be clear about that. Not to mention the Mimic itself. I mean, an endoskeleton this strong that can fit into any animatronic suit it wants to, that can mimic any voice and personality you give it or show it, that would print money for William Afton's business. Because keep in mind, at this point in the timeline, as far as we're aware, no killings have taken place. Sure, some employees have died because William Afton is an incredibly scummy businessman, but he's not an outright murderer yet. His main goal is probably still to have a successful pizzeria, and the Mimic seems like a golden ticket to that opportunity. So now he has F10N4 and this M2 endoskeleton, and needs to understand exactly how they work so he can thrive his business. So right here, William Afton sets up his base of operations, the private office, the same room that F10N4 is already in, to study the Mimic, learn how it works, and try to make one of his own. He leaves the Mimic in this pizzeria, the pizzeria that it already enjoys being in. I mean, think about the bad ending for Secret of the Mimic. When it catches us and kills us, it puts us into an animatronic and lights up the show, and just stares at us. I think the Mimic genuinely enjoys being in here, to an extent. And this is something that F10N4 likely knows and could have told William Afton, so he can study it from the safety of the private office. Which is why this private office is set up to observe and defend itself from the rooms in front of it. Because you're defending yourself from the fake pizzeria the Mimic was once housed in. And it's right here that the fun times were developed. William Afton was obsessed with making this Mimic. For one, like I mentioned, it prints money. But I wouldn't doubt if part of it is jealousy. We know how William Afton acts in the books when he realizes that Henry Emily is a better inventor than he is. He becomes obsessed with Henry and tries to do what he did and fails. I'd bet that William Afton is doing the same thing with Edwin. The Mimic is something William could never create on his best day, but he drives himself crazy trying to recreate it, trying to make his own to prove not only that he can, but that he's better than Edwin Murray. He didn't need him anyway. And his best attempt was the Funtime animatronics. Endoskeletons that can somewhat change their shape as well. Ones that can mimic voices. Ones that have set personalities, but not quite to the tier of the Mimic. At the end of the day, Funtime Freddy is Funtime Freddy. And they're not able to put on every other animatronic suit they'd want to, but they can move around a little bit. They can slither around and change their shape slightly. I mean, look at the Funtime endoskeleton. This thing looks insane. Like, we don't talk enough about how weird the Funtime endoskeletons are. Look at Endo 01, Endo 02. That's an endoskeleton. It's bare bones, it's metal plating, it does what it needs to. Is this a realistic endoskeleton? I don't know. Do I look like a scientist? No. I'm in a goddamn 10 by 10 office recording videos about FNAF theories. I don't know robotics. But what I do know is this kinda looks real, and this looks like insane tubing. So maybe this is why. Maybe the Fun Times are William Afton's best attempt at recreating the Mimic. And it's precisely because of that that allows them to, much later in the timeline, shed their exoskeletons and form into Ennard. Their endoskeletons might not be fully malleable in the weird way that the Mimic is, but they're able to conglomerate and form one body, and then change the shape of that body to fit inside of Michael Afton. That sounds a lot like a Mimic. Now, I'm not saying Ennard is the Mimic. This endoskeleton, I do believe, is a separate entity, but I think it is devilishly ironic that Edwin's best invention is still holding pretty strong 50 years later, but William's best attempt at recreating it not only failed, but then was sent to the same place the Mimic was, in a non-canon ending, and eventually degenerates and transforms into Molten Freddy, into the Blob, into something that would become William Afton's true downfall. A mass of wires dedicated to making sure he stays dead. And I think this is what we're going to learn in the next Five Nights at Freddy's game. Sister Location 2. Going through the old ruins of the Sister Location bunker and seeing it for what it really is. Seeing how it was connected to the FNAF 6 pizzeria, as it was all a part of that original underground facility built by Edwin Murray. Hell, maybe the FNAF 4 experiment chambers are somewhere nearby too. It's all been connected, way before child possession was involved. Well, I guess not fully, because David is a whole situation. But the remnant experiments, while they happened here, they happened much later. At first, it was just William and his obsession with not being the second best inventor under the Fazbear brand. So, that's the theory. The idea that Sister Location was much more connected to the FNAF 6 pizzeria than we ever thought, and that in doing so, William Afton was trying to recreate the Mimic, which is where he created the Funtime animatronics. It makes a lot of sense the more you look at it, and the more you look at it, the more evidence comes to light that backs up that claim, especially if our next game is going to be Sister Location 2, where we could learn all about this and finally understand why William Afton was down in that bunker in the first place. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Henry Emily is another entry into the long list of absolutely indispensable characters of the Five Nights at Freddy's timeline that we have barely any information about. But instead of a victim, Henry is the co-owner of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. And again, he's barely referenced in the entirety of the games. Yeah, we're gonna be scrounging at the bottom of the barrel for evidence today, but it's Five Nights at Freddy's, so I'm sure you're used to it. Slices, put on your aprons and let's bake ourselves a theory. So we'll start with the game lore about Henry Emily, which is admittedly incredibly sparse. The first confirmed reference to Henry Emily is in Secret of the Mimic, the most recent video game. And technically that's just to Hen. We're 99% certain about another time Henry shows up in the timeline, but that is not directly confirmed. So for now, all we have is Secret of the Mimic in this audio log addressed to Henry.
Test. Journal entry. I got the change order from Hen last night. None of this makes sense. I'm almost done. Why change it now? It would be so much easier to keep using the spring locks. Just hire some teens to wear the suits like we always do.
That's it. This is, again, literally, and by no stretch of the imagination, unless I'm forgetting something, the only time in the entire Five Nights at Freddy's franchise that Henry Emily is directly addressed in the games. You're kidding me. So how do we know what Henry is then? Well, there are other times in the franchise he's referenced, but we need information about him to know when he's being referenced. So where do we get that information? Well, we have to get a little creative with some of the less confirmed or less directly adjacent pieces of media from Five Nights at Freddy's, mainly the books. So
let's get creative!
The books are actually where we start learning more about Henry Emily, because he's like an actual character in them. Well, he exists in backstories. Damn, even in the best of times, he's a background character. The main character of the novel trilogy is Charlotte Emily, who, over the course of the 3 books, we learn is actually a robot. See, in the separate continuity for the FNAF novels, Henry Emily and William Afton were business partners that opened up Fredbear's Family Diner together, and then later Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Henry was an excellent inventor, and it was his genius that allowed for the creation of these animatronics and the springlock suits. In that continuity, however, William Afton kills his daughter, Charlotte Emily, and his grief sends him into a manic spiral, to the point where instead of going to therapy and processing this, he creates a robotic replica of Charlotte Emily and programs her to act like Charlotte never died. He then begins to make 3 more copies of different ages so she can grow up throughout the time, and uses this weird hallucinogenic technology to make her seem lifelike. He has lost his mind. Remember, keep in mind, and I'm never gonna get over this, his son's alive. In the book he has 2 kids, and the son survived. His sister reminds him like, hey,
you have a living son and wife still. Pay attention to them. And he is so locked in that not only does he focus all of his time on recreating his daughter, he programs her to think her brother died so her memories make sense. Her living brother. I can't get into it right now. Now, it's a wild story, and to be clear, it's different from the games. There's several things in the FNAF novel trilogy that do not line up with the game timeline that makes it a necessity that these are two separate stories. William dies way later in the timeline in a very different way. He seemingly only has Elizabeth as a daughter and no sons, etc., etc. But the thing is, even though these are two separate stories, they are related. They're echoes of each other. They may not be the same song, but they rhyme. After all, the same goes for the movies. That's a completely separate story. But William and Henry are still co-owners of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. They still work together to make that happen. William Afton is still the guy who kills people. There are echoes in these stories. So if we're to assume that in the games, a man named Henry Emily co-owned Freddy Fazbear's Pizza with William Afton, does that help us find any lore from the games and attach it to the game version of Henry? Well, it does, the one that most people know him for. Now we can talk about FNAF 6, or Freddy Fazbear Pizzaria Simulator. Which, by the way, it's still insane to me that the first piece of even speculative evidence that Henry Emily exists at all as a character is in the last main series game that Scott created. Huh? Anyway, throughout FNAF 6, it's clear that we're working for somebody. The man who set up all of this. He's the same man who leaves us the cassette tapes we use during the salvage minigames and whose monologues we hear at the end of the games. But those two monologues are the key times that we get any information about him. The first one plays if you've salvaged every animatronic and survived all the way to the end, where you get the FNAF monologue, like the thing people know, one of the best moments in the entire franchise, the one that goes,
"Connection terminated."
In this monologue, the voice tells us that he knows pretty much everything you could about what's happened at the Fazbear franchises. He knows Elizabeth by name and addresses Circus Baby as Elizabeth. So not only does he know her, but he knows that she's possessing Circus Baby. He calls William an old friend, sarcastically but still, and he claims that his daughter was killed by William Afton and possesses the marionette. So whoever this voice is incredibly entrenched into this series, to the point that he also knows Michael Afton. After all, he says that this job listing was not intended for the player character, who is likely Michael Afton, but says that even though a way out was planned for them, he has a feeling that's not what he wants and this is right where he wants to be, implying that he knows it's a similarly mournful, regretful person involved in this whole mess. And all of that already has connections to Henry Emily. But there's one more damning monologue if you go for the insanity ending, where you get Henry's inner thoughts in the lead up to creating FNAF 6. Not only are there way more regrets through it, but he mentions that the MCI victims are, quote, little souls trapped in prisons of my making. Well, we know that the MCI victims are possessing the original Freddy Fazbear animatronics. So if that's where they're trapped, this quote is saying that whoever this voice is the one who created the Freddy animatronics. Altogether, this game is telling us that FNAF 6, the Pizzeria Simulator, was created by a man who knows everything about Fazbear's, knows William Afton, knows about Elizabeth and Michael Afton, his daughter was killed by William Afton, and he made the animatronics for the Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location. That's just gotta be Henry Emily. And from there, we now know that Charlotte is the one who possesses the marionette in the games. So that's a lot of information about him. We basically learned that much of his backstory is the same, even if the plot of these games are different than the books. But is there any other reference to Henry throughout the series? Well, not really. A lot of people say that this desk man from FNAF World might be Henry Emily with the way he talks, but frankly, I think he's more likely a self-insert of Scott Cawthon than anything else, especially since Circus Baby kills him, which doesn't line up with the timeline at all. Technically speaking, there really isn't another mention of Henry throughout the entire games, but I do think we have reason to believe that there is speculative evidence of Henry somewhere else in this franchise, which is once again in Secret of the Mimic. An undercurrent of the story of Secret of the Mimic is that William Afton was slowly corroding MCM from the inside to topple it and buy it for himself. He was messing with contracts, extending things to waste time and money, and one of the biggest parts of this plan was to poach employees, approaching these unhappy MCM workers and saying, hey, here's a better job for a similar thing you're already doing for more pay. Come work for me instead. Slowly and steadily eating the business right out from Edwin's nose. But to do this, he would have needed help from somebody on the inside. In one of the admin offices, we find this email. We are almost there. I need the rest of the Murray staff contact info. The sooner the better. You get that for me, and I can sweeten the deal. How would you like to manage one of the new franchise locations? WA. In other words, William Afton had the contact of somebody in the administration wing who was able to get him the contact information of all the other employees at Murray's Costume Manor. But if you look at the administration wing, there's really just 3 offices. There's Edwin's, the big one up the stairs that's very obviously Edwin. There's one filled with Chica merchandise and different design documents, which seem like it's more likely to be Fiona's office. And then there's a third office filled with technology. I have a personal theory that there were 3 administrators at Murray's Costume Manor: Edwin and Fiona Murray and Henry Emily. After all, for the longest time, a lot of people had been speculating that Henry originally had his own business and joined together with William, bringing over Chica and a few other characters to form Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. And this lines up with that theory perfectly, but now with evidence. This game takes place in 1979. This company takeover took place at least 5 months ago, but likely over a year ago. So Henry could have originally been with Murray's Costume Manor before ever joining on to Fazbear's, to which then William offers him a much better position, one where he could even manage that new Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. We already know that Murray's Costume Manor was being commissioned to create Freddy Fazbear's Pizza animatronics, and if this theory is true, Henry is still the creator of those animatronics, just not under William Afton yet. Then he would have jumped ship when he saw the writing on the wall of MCM. After all, he's got a daughter to take care of. He needs a stable job. It is literally the night before this video goes up, and I just thought of something. I checked and verified it, and I just need to put this in, so walk with me. In the showroom lobby, there are these portraits, one of Edwin, one of Fiona. There's a blank space in the middle. Now, there's a lot of speculation what that is, but this lines up really well with the idea of Henry being the 3rd executive, because this wouldn't have been his father. His father died before these portraits would have been necessary. This wouldn't be David, because this is a business showroom and they all have placards. Why would David need a placard? He's a child. This space was the 3rd executive. This space was Henry Emily. That's why we don't get to see it. Sorry, I'm losing my mind. Anyway, with all this evidence in mind, what does the story of Henry Emily look like in Five Nights at Freddy's? Henry was an incredible engineer and one of the most valuable assets that Murray's Costume Manor had, able to make many of Edwin's animatronics come to life, and William Afton knew that. In the plans to expand Fredbear's Family Diner into the Freddy Fazbear franchise, he'd need that help. He would need that expertise, and while he's at it, he would need more assets in general. So William began dragging out the contract he had with MCM, wasting the time and money of an already fragile and suffering company, making it as shaky and unsteady as possible. And right when it's getting worse than it's ever been, William Afton reaches out to Henry Emily directly. After all, if Edwin, quote, gets the change orders from Hen, then it seems like the workflow was that as an administrator, Henry Emily would directly receive the design requests from William Afton and Fazbear's Pizza, and then forward them to Edwin for approval once he looked them over, which would mean William Afton had direct access and communication to Henry Emily, someone who would have been high up enough to have all the contact information for the rest of the staff, willing to give it to William in exchange for a solid position at Fazbear's Pizza and a managerial role at their new location. In other words, in order to save himself and make sure he had money to protect his kid, he co-founded Freddy Fazbear's Pizza with William Afton. After enough time, MCM fully collapses, and when the dust settles in 1983, William and Henry open up Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. But then, sometime after, either due to jealousy of Henry's family and talents, or the blame of the death of the crying child, William Afton kills Charlotte Emily outside of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, which sends Henry into a grief spiral. And he's out of the narrative for the majority of the timeline after this. It's speculated what he's doing during this time. Some people think he's framed for the MCI and is in prison. Others think the grief is too much and he's just in a depressive, isolated state until he comes back. But whatever that moment of time was, eventually he learns that whatever's going on at Fazbear's is still happening and needs to be stopped. And he knows someone like him is the only one that can do it. Someone with the knowledge of the franchise and knowledge of animatronics enough to fully stop this. So he begins the Pizzaria Simulator plan, a trap to lure every single related person into one place, gather them all, lock them in, and incinerate them so there's nothing left behind. And with all the material still attached to their souls gone, hopefully those souls can finally find rest, including himself, as he states,
I could make myself sleep, but not yet. Not until I undo what he has done and heal this wound.
and as far as we're aware, that's where his story ends. Some people think he goes on to become Old Man Consequences, but I think that's less likely than another person we've yet to make a video like this about. But it's still speculation at the end of the day.
One of the most common theories in the Five Nights at Freddy's community might be wrong. The theory being Molten Freddy is made up of the missing children incident kids, or Molten MCI. What if Molten Freddy is made up of souls from a missing child incident, just not the one that we thought it was? Well, that's the theory I'm here to bake for you today. So Slices, let's get on our aprons and get to work. First, let's gather our ingredients. We know for a near fact that there are two distinct missing child incidents. In FNAF 1, we see the newspaper clippings hinting that at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, 5 children go missing. We also keep getting evidence about this as the franchise goes on. In FNAF 2, we get Go Go Go, a minigame where Foxy leaves Pirate Cove a couple times and then eventually meets 5 corpses. The only restaurant we know of with a Pirate's Cove is Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, which would put those corpses at the same location. In FNAF 3, we get allusions towards this with the Happiest Day minigame, where those 5 souls help a weaker, earlier soul, Evan, or the crying child, move on. In between nights, we even see cutscenes of William Afton disassembling the FNAF 1 animatronics, granted, probably after the events of FNAF 1. Eventually, we see those 5 souls show back up, right after they're all disassembled. Those souls then trap him into a springlock suit and he dies in a back room. We then see the spirits fade away. Finally, at the end of the game, we see the masks of the original 5 animatronics. If the game is played normally, they're lit up, but if you get the secret ending, you see the lights on the inside are dimmed down, implying that they've moved on. Furthermore, in Freddy Fazbear Pizzaria Simulator, we get this screen of 5 tombstones, each of them lining up perfectly on that FNAF 3 end screen. We also get names on the tombstones, presumably the names of the children who were killed and then stuffed into that respective animatronic. So clearly there's a missing children's incident at the Freddy Fazbear's Pizza involving 5 children who go missing, but really they're dead. William Afton kills them and stuffs them into animatronic suits. We know this. This isn't new. We've known most of this since FNAF 1. But where's there evidence of a second missing children incident? Where could it have even been? Well, the answer to both of those questions is in FNAF 2. Specifically, the FNAF 2 location. I believe it's called New Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, but I think that name is contested. I'll just call it the FNAF 2 location. During FNAF 2, one of the death minigames you can get is called Save Them. We explore the layout of the FNAF 2 location, finding 5 corpses along the way until we see the text, "You can't." So, within the same game of Go Go Go, where we see the first missing child incident in clearly the old Freddy Fazbear's Pizza restaurant, we see Save Them, clearly the new restaurant, but also with 5 corpses, implying that another murder happened here. Furthermore, these animatronics are acting very erratically, more so in Night 6, when we hear Phone Guy talking about someone who used the yellow suit in the back room, and then they all started acting wild. So much so that they might even attack children. That's practically unheard of besides the fun times. We get more confirmation that something happened in FNAF 3.
There's been somewhat of an investigation going on. We may end up having to close for a few days. I don't know. I want to emphasize, though, that it's really just a precaution. Fazbear Entertainment denies any wrongdoing. These things happen sometimes.
So clearly, Fazbear Entertainment is covering up something again. Now, this is contested in the community, but personally, I think it's incredibly likely that the toy animatronics are haunted. First off, most people who don't believe they are blame their erratic behavior on bad programming. But come on. Yes, there's a facial database for adults, but would bad programming lead them to crawl through vents, kill people, and crawl on the ceiling? Not to mention they have black eyes with white dots in the middle, a staple of haunted animatronics in the game prior. They can even do things they normally can't. Mangle crawls on the ceiling. This isn't something Mangle can do. We get confirmation of this in Special Delivery. One of the emails mentions a manager complaining to the staff that they can't build Mangle right. They have reports that Mangle used to crawl on the ceiling, but they can't figure it out. They keep saying that Mangle just can't do that. The reason Mangle could crawl on the ceiling is because it was possessed. There's no other explanation that makes sense. So I think it's incredibly likely that there's a missing children incident in the Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location, and then when that restaurant closed down and the new one opened, William did it again, and there was a second missing children incident with 5 more kids. So if there's 2 missing children incidences? So if there's 2 missing children incidences, which one goes into Molten Freddy? Do any of them go into Molten Freddy? At this point, with the evidence we have, I feel like it's practically canon that you can trace back Molten Freddy and Scrap Baby all the way to the fun times. To be brief, a mixture of mismatched remnant is infused into the fun times, as alluded to by the Candy Cadet stories about 5 becoming 1.
The man could only afford 1 coffin. so he stitched the 5 bodies together to make one, and buried the child.
However, in that state, they're confused and erratic, so they want to feel more whole again and reform into Ennard. Eventually, they notice that Elizabeth is not only whole as a spirit, but also not one of them. So Elizabeth is able to make it out of Ennard as Scrap Baby, and Ennard becomes Molten Freddy. The two arrive at the FNAF 6 location and burn to a crisp, releasing their remnant and passing on. So that's the path from Fun Times to FNAF 6. The question becomes, where did the remnant come from to infuse into the Fun Times? In FNAF 3 on the Happiest Day minigame series, also through FNAF World for further confirmation, we see the original 5 missing children incident kids attempt to help Evan move on by giving him his happiest day, the birthday party he never got. I know it isn't confirmed that his name is Evan, and the evidence we have to prove that is pretty speculative at best, but it doesn't really mess with the lore if we get his name wrong, and Evan just feels better than Crying Child or Bite Victim of 83, so Evan it is. But when does this happen? Especially if the first missing children incident souls are trapped in the back room with Springtrap all this time. Well, I think it's very likely that in that last cutscene we see, the souls recognize each other for the first time. Think about it, they're all just floating there without any obstruction in the way. For a brief moment, they can see each other and that their murderer is gone, but before moving on, they notice that there's another lost and scared soul, Evan. So using the arcade machines that we see in the back room, they work together to attempt to recreate the party he deserved, to help him calm down and to help him pass on. Then, once their killer is dead and their friend passed on, they all find peace and move on as well. All except for Cassidy, the vengeful spirit, the one you should not have killed. He somehow senses that Afton is still alive and attaches himself to Afton like a leech, just to make sure that that bastard stays down. Unfortunately, years pass and Springtrap is set free by the haunted house guys, and with him, Cassidy. The question then becomes, if the missing children incident move on in that back room, what about the Fun Times? Where does their remnant come from? The current prevailing theory is that the Follow Me cutscenes show us this process. William takes apart the animatronics and collects what materials he can for remnant. There's however one issue with this. William dies at the end of Follow Me. If all these games happen consecutively, and we have no reason to doubt that they wouldn't, he'd collect the remnant, but then die and get trapped in the back room before being able to use it. More than that, when he's collecting the remnant, the souls from those animatronics leave the animatronics, so presumably the remnant would leave as well. Something that confuses it even more is the FNAF 6 grave shot. When we see this at the end of FNAF 6, it implies that that's when those souls move on. But how can that be if they've moved on already in the back of FNAF 1's location? Well, it could be alluding to the fact that that is when they get justice, as William Afton is finally burnt to a crisp. But that's hard to say. Frankly, the timeline is, we see these souls move on in a back room, then we see them move on via Happiest Day, and then we see them move on again with tombstones. There's gotta be something else happening here. What is the missing link that gives us remnant for the Fun Times and explains all these moving ons? FNAF 2. If possessed, the toy animatronics have no clear ending. All we know is that they're said to be disassembled at the end of FNAF 2. If that's the case, William could very likely be the one to take care of them and just bring them back to his bunker, melt them down, and infuse the Fun Times with them. After all, this would explain how he gets remnant before the Follow Me cutscenes. Seeing how the Fun Times don't quite work the way they're intended, he might think he just needs more remnant, so he goes back to the old Freddy Fazbear's Pizzaria location and tries to get more. But unfortunately, well, fortunately for us, unfortunately for him, he dies. So he can't go back to his experiment, and that's why Michael has to go and finish the job. So what would this mean for the timeline? Well, let's put our mixture in the oven and see what kind of theory bakes out of it. William Afton kills and stuffs 5 children at the Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, but doesn't seem to notice any observable movement. Before too long, the pizzeria shuts down and he loses access to those animatronics. Then, when new Freddy Fazbear's Pizza opens up, this time with a whole new set of animatronics, he starts taking apart the older models, but still nothing. So he decides to try killing again. This time, for whatever reason, it works. The children latch onto the nearby toy animatronics and start going berserk. His experiment was a success, but the repercussions were getting too much to handle. He needed to transport them to a safer location to observe them, in a more controlled environment. Luckily for him, the restaurant was closing down as well. He takes it upon himself to dispose of the toy animatronics for the company, instead bringing them to his bunker. There, he melts them down and infuses them into the Fun Times he created. Now every variable is accounted for. However, they're just as erratic as before, and seemingly unsure of what they are. He assumes he may need more remnant for the experiment, or even the old Spring Bonnie suit to help tame them. Luckily, a new version of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza is opening up, in the same old building, with the same old models. but refurbished. He waits until the restaurant is inevitably shut down, as they always are, and once the doors are boarded, he lures each of the original 5 animatronics into the back room and takes them apart, looking for traces of remnant. However, in doing so, he releases the souls that were trapped inside these suits, and they corner him into the old Spring Bonnie suit that he knew oh too well. He's snapped dead by the suit, and for the first time in a long while, the children's spirits see each other. As they're about to move on though, they notice one spirit who's too afraid and unaware of what's going on, Evan. They use the nearby arcade machines to make an environment where they can give him the happiest day he needs. Once done, he passes on, and seeing him settled and their murderer dead, most of the other spirits pass as well, all except for one, Cassidy. This spirit is outraged at what William has done, and wants to ensure his death, so he attaches himself to William like a leech, and watches in that case that William comes back. It's around this time that Michael makes his way to Sister Location. The rest of the timeline would occur as we already know it, except instead of the original missing children, it's the second one. So, entered forms of the souls of the second missing children incident. They scoop Michael and inhabit his body, they leave when they sense his body rotting away, and Ennard splits into Molten Freddy and Scrap Baby. Then eventually they both end up at Freddy Fazbear Pizzaria Simulator, and all burn until their remnant is all but gone. They've received their happiest days as well, leaving only a pile of agony-ridden machine behind. So, I like this theory. A lot, actually. But as my Tani pointed out in the bakery, the official Ritos Discord, where we post about FNAF stuff, games in general, talk about things, whatever we want. This Minecraft server is super fun, but it's 18+, you should totally join by clicking there. As my Tani said, there's a lot of holes in this theory. Not to say that there's... Oh, okay, bye. Not to say that there's evidence disproving that the second missing children incident kids are the ones that's in Ennard and then Molten Freddy, but more so, there's a lot of evidence supporting that it's the original missing children incident kids. I'll link the original Reddit post here, but one of the most compelling pieces of evidence is how much the original missing children show up in Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator. We see Susie about to get kidnapped, the gravestone illusion. We see Give Gifts Give Life during Henry's monologue while he's talking about the souls that are here. This game has a lot of references to the original missing children, but practically none to the second batch in FNAF 2. There's a lot more that kind of poke some holes in here, but just know that while my theory is very narratively satisfying, there are some holes in it, so I wouldn't go spouting it as fact. Although, something we can all agree on is that none of these souls, Missing Children Incident 1 or 2, make it onto Security Breach. In fact, there aren't any souls in Security Breach besides William Afton.
Looking at the latter half of the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise, a lot of veteran FNAF fans look at things like Glamrock Freddy or The Mimic or even The Tangle and just go, how did I get here? After all, there's a percentage of FNAF fans out there that just accepted the story ended at Ultimate Custom Night 6 years ago. Meanwhile, there's been 6 years of video games since, I think 4 or 5 in total. But what did happen? What got us from there to here? Well, today I'm going to try to bridge that gap. I believe that Freddy Fazbear Pizzeria Simulator, or FNAF 6, isn't an ending, but instead a transition to the latter half of the franchise. And I genuinely think the answers we're given in that game and others give us some pretty strong inclinations as to what happened between them, telling us how we went from the fire that ended it all to the villain that just won't die. Slices, put on your aprons and let's bake ourselves a theory. But before we can solve FNAF 6 and the whole FNAF timeline, we need to know what's actually happening in Freddy Fazbear Pizzeria Simulator, at least as is directly told to us in-game and with associated books. So, what did happen? Well, between the file name HRY, the fact that in the Silver Eyes he helped create the franchise, and the fact that he has a daughter killed by William Afton, I feel it's safe to assume that Henry is the one behind Freddy Fazbear Pizzeria Simulator. I'm just gonna call it FNAF 6. If I say Freddy Fazbear Pizzeria Simulator one more time, I'm going to go crazy. Henry Emily from the Silver Eyes is co-owner and creator of Fazbear with William Afton, and it was Henry's expertise that helped to create the animatronics, an expertise that we see in full bloom in this game. Henry wants to end all of this, the suffering that he feels partly responsible for and the man behind the slaughter. So he creates the Pizzeria Simulator, a building meant to put up the facade of a Freddy's Pizza to lure in all of the remaining players in the timeline. But is it a real location? Like, do kids come here and play during the day and then we do stuff at night? That is kind of up for debate. On one hand, when we see the main map of the area in the final monologue, the center room where the pizzeria would be fades away. And also, Henry states that the maze is filled with sounds and sights and smells and misdirection. So the sounds we hear during the day shift of kids playing could be those sounds Henry is talking about. And I mean, surely Henry wouldn't lure several animatronics with a history of killing children to a building children are in, right?
Right? Well, on the other hand, you do have to make money in order to get things done. And sure, all of the money could theoretically be given by Henry to keep up the facade to the player, but you could also get sued if you have too much liability and or go bankrupt. And I know Henry is trying to keep up appearances here, but dooming his plan to bankruptcy because his volunteer didn't play pretend good enough seems like a step too far. Not to mention, we do physically see this room in Security Breach, implying that it is a real room. So it does seem like there's an actual functioning pizzeria at this location, probably on the ground floor, and then much lower underneath is where we are. Using this pizzeria, Henry is able to lure in Scrap Baby, Molten Freddy, Lefty, William Afton, and a helpful volunteer. William Afton looks like this in his current state after the fire of FNAF 3 and possible other in-between game shenanigans, leading most players to call him Scrap Trap. Scrap Baby and Molten Freddy are the aftermath of Ennard. With teasers from the Scott Games websites, we know that Ennard left Michael's body, and then the inner pieces of Ennard started fighting with each other until eventually Circus Baby was kicked out from the group. So it's assumed that the rest of Ennard formed into Molten Freddy, and Circus Baby formed into Scrap Baby. However, the souls within Molten Freddy are up for debate. Some people believe it to be the victims of the Funtime animatronics, others posit that it could be the crying child. But I do think the most likely option is that it is part of the missing child incident souls. If you want me to go more in depth and show more evidence for that, I did just recently make a pretty big video on it right here, but for the sake of time, just that's what I believe. Lefty is actually a new animatronic, presumably built by Henry to capture the marionette. So again, another player in the timeline, but one that wouldn't come willingly. And finally, Henry's volunteer, the player, is also up for debate, although much less so than Molten Freddy. I and many others believe it's most likely Michael Afton. For one, it fits thematically that Michael would be one of the main protagonists of the series and help end it all. And not to mention specifically this line.
And to you, my brave volunteer, who somehow found this job listing not intended for you. Although there was a way out planned for you, I have a feeling that's not what you want. I have a feeling that you are right where you want to be. I am remaining as well.
If this is Michael Afton, and he knows William Afton is in the building, it would make sense that he would also want to die here so he can finally rest as well. Now, some people think the first part of this line implies that we're not playing as Michael Afton, but instead some random person. After all, the line says this wasn't intended for them. But I argue the opposite. I believe that Henry intended this volunteer job to be for some random person. That's why he planned an escape route. He didn't intend for Michael Afton to show up because, as far as he's aware, Michael Afton should be dead. If anything, he's probably surprised Michael Afton is still around, and that's why the job wasn't intended for him. I mean, hell, even Mike thinks he's supposed to be dead.
I should be dead, but I'm not.
Once everyone is in the building, Henry burns everything to the ground in an attempt to have everyone find peace or rest, and or William Afton burn in hell forever. Something worth noting, however, we do once again see this room in Security Breach, and it looks mostly unburnt. So it seems likely that the maze was burnt, whereas the actual pizzeria section was left relatively unharmed. Maybe that's what caused the sinkhole. It was burned so much that the structural integrity fell, and the whole building sunk down, mostly intact. So why isn't this the end of the story? Everyone is trapped in a metal locked maze and burnt to ash. It seems pretty final. Well, in Security Breach and its free DLC Ruin, we can travel to this building, and there are still animatronics inside. So did nothing work? Was Henry's plan entirely for naught? Let's build out our timeline of events after the FNAF 6 fire and see if we can make our way to Security Breach to figure that out. Immediately after FNAF 6, it's basically confirmed, not directly confirmed, but incredibly evidentiarily solid, that Ultimate Custom Night takes place. A never-ending torment of William Afton using his own agony and memories by the vengeful spirit. We're nearly certain of this thanks to a few things. From the games, we have a lot of death quotes that allude to the fact we're playing as William Afton.
I am a burning reminder of your misdeeds.
I am your wickedness, made of flesh. I am the fearful reflection of what you have created.
And that someone is keeping us here even though they tried to burn us.
Greetings from the fire, and from the one you should not have killed.
He tried to release you. He tried to release us. But I'm not gonna let that happen. I will hold you here. I will keep you here. no matter how many times they burn us.
That, paired with the story The Man in Room 1280, makes this fairly straightforward. Well, what is The Man in Room 1280? Well, I'll be incredibly brief. It's a Fazbear Fright story. Here's a quick summary. Essentially, William Afton should be dead, but instead he's an incredibly burnt corpse that's somehow barely alive with semi-translucent skin in a hospital. The nurses and doctors there have even tried to put him down to put him out of his misery, but he just won't die. Not only that, but a spirit of a boy with curly hair and an alligator mask keeps chasing them off. Later in the story, we find out that there are two consciousnesses within his mind. In another story, we learn that that other consciousness is that boy named Andrew. I was being quick about it. In another story, we learn that that consciousness was a boy named Andrew, and he doesn't remember why, but he knows that he hated William so much that he wanted to keep him alive as long as possible to torture him with his own mind. Does this sound familiar? This process is likely what we're seeing in Ultimate Custom Night. William Afton being kept alive by a vengeful spirit to torture him forever for what he's done. How is that possible? Well, again, we have a pretty good idea on this because of Fazbear Frights. Essentially, it's likely that it's done through agony. Frankly, we do not have time to go into the differences of Remnant and Agony in this video. But again, lucky for you, I did an entire video on it, a couple of them, but the main one is right here. For now, if you don't want to watch that, just take my word that Remnant is the mixture of soul or positive memory and emotion and metal, whereas Agony is specifically the energy associated with the most negative form of human emotion, agony. This energy, like Remnant, is able to possess objects and manifest in different ways. But we see in the Fazbear Frights stories that it's also able to affect memories. An example of this in the epilogues, Eleanor, a character that I don't have time to get into, traps a detective in his own mind with her own memories and his, torturing him with them. All this to say, at the FNAF 6 location, there's definitely a lot of Remnant. However, if the blueprint hypothesis by William Afton is true, then excessive heat can neutralize Remnant. That being said, we don't know what neutralizes agony, so it's possible that heat doesn't. In other words, there's a very high possibility that the FNAF 6 fire did burn away all of the remaining remnant of the series, but left a massive pile of agony with melted animatronics all over. And that sounds like a perfect place for William Afton to be forever tormented in his own mind. Not to mention, if what I believe is true, then the other remaining souls at the location find peace with FNAF World around the same time. It's a nice, neat bow on the end of the story. William Afton is stuck in this burnt basement forever reliving his worst memories, and all the other souls move on. So why is it not the end of the story? Well, that depends on what you believe. What we're about to talk about, I think, is possibly the biggest debate in the Five Nights at Freddy's fandom. Do you believe that the Fazbear Frights stories, notably the epilogues and associated stories with them, are within the same continuity of the games? If you do believe in that, then that's the rest of this video. The stories of those books tell us what happens after FNAF 6. And to be fair, there's good merit to that argument. After all, Into the Pit, one of those stories, is being made into a game, and has a subsequent Choose Your Own Adventure book coming out later this year, which is great evidence for the books that go along with that game to be brought into the game continuity very clearly. There is, in my opinion, one major problem with this thinking though, and the theory that the Fazbear Frights books are directly tied to the game's continuity, and that is Burntrap being William Afton. This guy in the security breach basement. If you believe that the Fazbear Frights stories are in continuity, this cannot be William Afton. You need to find someone else for this to be. In the Fazbear Frights stories, The Man in Room 1280, that story ends with William Afton's body exploding onto several other pieces of Fazbear merchandise and technology, infecting all of them with his agony. And then the rest of the stories in the epilogues are dealing with those possessed infected items, until eventually they all conglomerate into one massive amalgamation and are shoved into a lake, and the puppet makes it rip itself apart and die. So William Afton's body is goop that possessed things and is at the bottom of a lake, torn apart. Not here. And sure, that could have happened in the games, but that would require that Henry's fire was found by paramedics and they were able to retrieve Scraptrap, and somehow, this is one of my big sticking points, the Man in Room 1280 has no animatronic parts on him. He's just the burnt corpse. So somehow they would have had to get him out of the Spring Bonnie suit. I guess you could say that the
Spring Bonnie suit fully melted off of him, but then like, I don't know, that seems weird. So I don't know. I think that's definitely a possibility and I understand that line of thinking. But if you think that, then this cannot be William Afton. William Afton is gone for good if that's the case. So you have to find another explanation for this creature. And there are other explanations, especially since Into the Pit is coming out. I think it's a perfectly valid theory to think that this is an agony manifestation. Think about the fact that Into the Pit is being turned into a full game. Into the Pit features Pit Bonnie, a agony manifestation. It's an empty Spring Bonnie suit that somehow turns into this weird organic flesh-like creature. I see it. You know, like this matches that description in a way, this weird organic manifestation. And there are other explanations too. I know some people think this is the Mimic with a body affixed to it. There are a lot of different ways to explain this creature. But if you, like me, think that this is William Afton because he was burnt in a basement, and then when you go to that basement, you find this burnt corpse, which I think is pretty straightforward. If this is William Afton, Fazbear Frights cannot be within the game's continuity. And if so, what happens after FNAF 6? Well, we'll have to work backwards. We know that Glamrock Freddy digs down to FNAF 6 under the command of Vanny, meaning Vanny was already in existence before anything from that basement was recovered or retrieved. So that means, in Help Wanted, whatever turned Vanessa into Vanny, Glitchtrap, cannot be from technology from the FNAF 6 area. Are you following me? I'm going over a couple different games right now. In Help Wanted, Glitchtrap is formed from scanning in old technology produced by Fazbear, and whatever technology that is can't be FNAF 6 because FNAF 6 was uncovered by Vanny, who was already turned by Glitchtrap. So what technology was scanned to create this anomaly? Well, we're not sure exactly, but I think it's likely that it's something with the Mimic 1 program on it. After all, Fazbear said the technology scanned in was meant to assist in pathing and coding, and the Mimic 1 program was used by Fazbear to make it easier to program animatronics. Not to mention the many qualities of Glitchtrap that are similar to a Mimic program, which I've gone over several times on this channel. But if that all is the case, and Glitchtrap is the Mimic 1 program, what was the goal of sending Vanny to the FNAF 6 pizzeria? Well, if Glitchtrap is the Mimic 1 program, it's entirely possible that Burntrap wasn't Plan A. In Ruin, the free DLC to Security Breach, we learn that the Mimic, an endoskeleton dating from way back in the beginning of the franchise, is trapped in the basement of the FNAF 6 pizzeria. And from the context clues of the area, it's likely that Gregory and Vanessa trapped him down there, most likely while they were under the control of Glitchtrap. And according to Gregory from Ruin, the Mimic has been down there for a really long time, but they're not quite sure what it is. I should be clear here, because some of you might be getting lost. The Mimic and the Mimic 1 program are two separate things. In Tales from the Pizzaplex, we learn that the Mimic is an endoskeleton with the Mimic 1 program inside of it, whereas the Mimic 1 program is just the coding that allows the Mimic to do what it does. The Mimic 1 program being something that will see something and replicate it. The main point of this program is to copy what it sees. Because of that, when I say Glitchtrap or the Mimic 1 program, I'm talking about the version of the Mimic 1 program that was uploaded to Help Wanted and saw and trained itself on everything inside of Help Wanted, a recreation of Fazbear's worst moments, whereas the Mimic is an endoskeleton whose history is somewhat unclear. If you believe that Tales from the Pizzaplex are fully within continuity, like Fazbear Frights, then we have a more direct answer for what the Mimic is. It's an endoskeleton created by Edwin Murray. It then took on the role of a babysitter for his son David, but then David died, and then it was abused by Edwin, and then left to rot, and then started killing people, and then it was brought to the Pizzaplex, and then started killing more people, and then it was disabled and put in a springlock suit. It's a lot. But if you don't believe that the Tales from the Pizzaplex books are within the game's continuity, then it's unclear who made the Mimic. Possibly Henry, because that would make sense since he's kind of like the tech whiz, but we don't really have any leads on that. Regardless, if Glitchtrap was trying to come into the real world, which it seems like that's the plan with Help Wanted and how it treats Vanessa and Jeremy and Gregory and all them, then the Mimic would be a perfect vessel in its eyes. It's literally an endoskeleton already programmed to house its programming. It just needs to be re-uploaded with its new trained data. That vessel, the Mimic, was possibly Glitchtrap's first target in going down there. It may have known that the Mimic endoskeleton was trapped and contained within the FNAF 6 pizzeria. But then Vanny and Glamrock Freddy get down there and they find this burnt mass of wires and animatronics coated in this black viscous liquid. And in the center of it, William Afton's burnt corpse
Still in one piece, suddenly a way better vessel is found. If Glitchtrap is trying to recreate William Afton's deeds, who better to do it in than William Afton's body? So they lock the mimic in the basement and get to work on repairing William Afton. However, once they take him out of that pile of agony, it forms its own body and tries to seek out William Afton and put him right back into Ultimate Custom Night. And thus, the beginning of Security Breach. I know I skipped over some details like where Gregory comes from and more in-depth things that happen with Help Wanted, but I've talked about that previously, and I think I'll save more in-depth stuff for that for the final timeline. This was more so how we get from FNAF 6 to Security Breach. And I think that makes sense, right? Especially with the idea that Henry's fire was never discovered by paramedics or firefighters. It was likely self-contained, and then the whole building collapsed and Fazbear just paved over it to prevent any liability. Kind of like how they did with every back room when corpses were found in there. It's pretty on brand for Fazbear to just pave over liability. This, I think, is the most logical and evidentiarily backed pathway from FNAF 6 to Security Breach.